Hello, my name is Joel McLeod, flying solo today on the 905er podcast. With me today, I have a third time guest, I think, to the podcast, Frank Dominic, uh, social media commentator extraordinaire, guru of all things Ontario.
Guy who
Uh,
likes complaining about stuff.
exactly. Thanks for taking the time to come on today, Frank, to talk about, well, kind of the top Ontario news item in the works today, and that is the news that last year in 2023, a deal was signed by the Ontario government to right now Staples, Canada, that a number of Service Ontario locations would be closing around the province and reopening inside Staples stores um, sometime this year is the plan. And the idea is that this is a pilot
One of
project.
them is actually already ready. So not even sometime this year. It's one of them is almost ready to go apparently.
Yes, I saw that too. I think in Oakville.
Yeah.
It's the notches, I guess, have been keyed out for the kiosk and whatnot. But apparently, this is a pilot project, and there's also news today in Global is reporting that Walmart is also being considered for this new way that we interact with the government to obtain things like your driver's license, your health card, a hunter's license, if that is your thing, birth certificates, business arrangements, any number of vast interactions that we would have with the government of Ontario is now where are we going to be getting paper and toner for printers now, apparently. I know you've been going off on this a lot on social media, Frank. How about you just lay down your thoughts on the process? We'll start from there.
Yeah, I've been biting my tongue about this one for a long time because I actually the first time I heard about this was in June. Um, I believe it was in June. I had somebody who worked in the government sent me a DM and they were like, I can't give you any information. I can't tell you what department I work for. I can't tell you anything, blah, blah, blah. But the government is planning on privatizing all of Service Ontario and outsourcing it to Staples. And at first I was like, yeah, okay, sure. You can't give me any more information. You can't tell me anything about yourself, but you're going to tell me this really big, juicy thing. And so I didn't make a video on it because I felt like that was a really big accusation. The person was like, I'm going to lose my job. You can't say anything, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about it. Fast forward to maybe September, I got another message from a political staffer at Queen's Park, who was like, "Yeah, like I heard about this Staples thing, and like I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's like they were kind of saying like I think it might be a good thing, but they were mentioning that a lot of people within the government, both political staffers and nonpartisan, like just regular government workers, had a lot of concerns, and the government seemed to not want to address those concerns. So both from within the party and outside of the party. And once again, I had to take that as hearsay because like this person claims that they are XYZ. And yeah, I can look them up on LinkedIn and I can do
Mhm.
whatever research I can. But at the end of the day, it's just a random person DMing me, right? But this was the second time I heard of the Staples thing. So at that point, I'm like, okay, so the Staples thing is legit. Fast forward to, was it November or December? And they made the
Yep.
announcement. And I didn't make a video at the time because it said, oh, yeah, they're opening up some kiosks and Staples. And in my mind, I'm like, well, if it's just them putting some kiosks in Staples, whatever. What
Right.
really started irking me is when we found out they were closing 11 locations, even if they're closing locations that are already private. These are technically small businesses owned by local families, which, like, I'm not a fan of the privatization of Service Ontario in general, but like, even the small bit of positive out of that, we're going to now remove it and give that money to multi billion dollar
Mhm.
American conglomerates. And we're now also going to give them our tax dollars to do those renovations. So it went from this could be a nice addition to, oh, we're now losing locations to we're losing locations owned by Canadians to give money to American billionaires. So that progression is what made me and I think a lot of other people who are in the political landscape
Right.
frustrated. Even if this isn't that big of a deal, it's a very frustrating situation.
Well, I'm gonna let's put a pin in that comment that it's not that big of a deal because I think it is. We're gonna come back to that later on. But
Yep.
let's just talk about the timing here because I was looking like when was I was a little surprised that yeah, this kind of slipped past all of our collective radars until just recently. And I was like, what, why is that? And the announcement came out roughly at the same time that Bonnie Crombie had won the Liberal leadership, and that was the headline in Ontario news was that okay, Liberals have a new leader, da 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 da, and of course then they started the Tories started in with their attack ads pretty much like minute one of her victory, and that was what dominated the Ontario news cycle for a while, us included, admittedly. And I thought, looking back at like the timing of that just seems so suspect. That okay, we're going to take this noise over, which is a bit whoop-de-doo. Like the Liberals are going to elect a new leader, one way or the other. We all knew that. That's not really news, but this is big to basically say the way that we interact, the front line really of how we interact with the government, the baseline of what we expect our government to be able to provide, driver's license, health card, all that stuff, birth certificates, is going to be privatized. We're selling that off to an American company nonetheless.
We're selling it off to an American company so that it can be staffed by international students getting paid minimum wage that aren't in unionized jobs that
Well,
would normally be unionized.
well, that's it. And I thought that's like it's just kind of like it's in the dead of night. Let's put this off. Like, what's your take on that? What is this? And then what it could just be that Doug Fort's history of making big projects typically ends in failure. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, I can't think of one success that he had that didn't that like can be called a unified success across like all party
Mhm.
lines. Like you know what I mean? Like even if you don't like Trudeau, there's things that even most conservative voters will say like, yes, this was a good thing, this was a bad thing, blah blah. Blah. Like there are unifiers typically on most levels of government. Um, I don't see anything in Doug's portfolio, which when we look at this, that makes me wonder what else is there. So
Mhm.
as I mentioned, I had both somebody who worked, I would assume, closely with this project, and then on top of that, a staffer, both of whom aired their concerns and said the government is not addressing these concerns. So what that says to me is this is going to be another one of those scandals where it's going to be dragged out simply because the Ford government refuses to be upfront and honest about it. And like, just look, like Richard Southern has a new thing to tweet every 8 hours about this.
Right.
Like, why is this story that should have been in the cycle of news? Like, we're not in a slow news cycle. There is stuff to talk about, even within Ontario. So in a cycle that's not necessarily slow, why are we constantly coming back to this? And I think it's because we're going to continue to see a slow trickle about the story as more and more details are revealed,
Mhm.
as more people start being more comfortable to voice their opinions with journalists versus people like me.
Right.
And I think we're going to see that there is something a little more. I'm not saying it's not going to be greenbelt level, but I think that Ford just thought that he could sweep this under the rug when the best thing for him to do politically probably would have just been to be upfront and honest about it, and say, oh,
Well,
Staples locations are usually located in big city centers. They kind of like just didn't try to cover this one up. They just went full face, like, hey, we're doing this
like,
thing with an American company.
well, I think at the very surface level, like there is a sense, like there's a common sense reality to it. Because as you said, there's a Staples kind of all over the place. They're in central
Usually off the
location.
highway. Like
Yeah, or
they're
they're in densely populated like areas that people tend to congregate anyways. That's why they put Staples there in the first place. You're kind of going there on business needs anyways. You can send out usually pure later packages. And for the record, folks, we are not sponsored by Staples, so this isn't a shill, but you can go, if you got to get your stuff printed up, packaged, uh,
yeah, it is a
parcel
convenient
sent
place to
out.
do all that.
The
And
convenience
you
store
know what?
is,
It might be a good place for Service Ontario kiosks because I don't know if you've been to a Staples recently, but they're always empty.
well, that's the thing. So that this is coming in, and at the on a knee jerk reaction, it's kind of like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense. But then you start pausing, you're like, well, why the fact that this was a sole sourced contract?
Yes, and I think that's where the
And that,
issues come. Yeah,
and
yeah.
I question that. And my thoughts are, the other problem is nobody attending, or not attending, nobody goes into retail anymore. That's been a problem in this past year, is that post pandemic, people just tend not to go shop in retail. It's been noticed that Staples, I'm not gonna say the stock, but like just Staples return is just slowly dropping. People are just not shopping there as frequently as they used to. And it makes you wonder, was this just a ploy of saying, hey, you know what? Can you just put a few of these into our stores so people have an excuse just to go in the door, and maybe we can sell them, some toner cartridge or a ream of paper.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that bugs me is like I honestly believe that even if they had opened this up to other businesses, Staples probably would have won. And the reason I'm saying that is because it is, for the most part, in well-populated
Mhm.
areas, with the density, not a lot of foot traffic in the store, so you don't have to worry about people feeling like uncomfortable. Like you would think that, oh, a public library or a community center might be the best bet, but you also don't want
Right.
that kind of foot traffic in those areas. A lot of people are saying, well, there's one Service Ontario that's attached to a Canadian Tire. Why can't we do that everywhere? Well, Canadian Tires are very, very busy places. And other people are like, oh, I can't believe Loblaws didn't want to bid on this. Loblaws wouldn't have been able to handle this. Like, you can't put this in a grocery store. There would not be the space.
Right.
In a Walmart, because Walmart built out that front face where they used to have they've gotten rid of some of them, but like a lot of them will have a McDonald's and a hairdresser and a dog service
Right.
or whatever, eyeglasses. It makes sense at a Walmart, it makes sense at a Costco, and it makes sense at a Staples. But the fact that this contract was given to Staples without any tender, without any conversation with other companies to see what else is out there,
Right.
that's fishy. There's like, why? Like, there's no Doug Ford, Mr. I run Ontario like a business. That's not how you do business. I was
Right.
recently trying to work with a business. I called a guy and he's like, oh, to do this thing, it's gonna cost you $1,500. I said, you're crazy. I called another company. He's like, oh, $400. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds a lot better. If I didn't
Right.
shop around, I would have gotten ripped off. Doug Ford doesn't shop around and he keeps getting ripped off.
Well,
Well,
it's not
actually,
just,
just getting ripped off. It's our tax
well,
dollars.
that's the thing. And that eh, my question is if you are looking to shop like a business, uh my thoughts are then why not just close down the Service Ontario centers and switch to an online retail experience? By that I mean finding a way so that we can get these documents. And that's the thing. Perfect example. I had to go get birth certificates for my kids, right? Um, we did not go into Service Ontario. We had to do it online. You have to go in, fill out your form. Here's my SIN number. Here's my documentation. Blah 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 blah. And they say, okay, we'll get back to you in 6 to 8 weeks. Um, you go in, you say, okay, I need to get my new health card. I need to get my new driver's license. Okay, you get the photo taken, but then like, okay, it'll be 6 to 8 weeks. Here's your temporary thing. And you're thinking the entire time I go into these Service Ontario centers, I keep thinking like this should be done online. There should be a way to say, hey, I can go into a CAA or to a Photoshop or Walmart and say, get me my passport photo taken. Okay, boom, take that, and I can mail that into Service Ontario to get my health card, my driver's license, all those documentations mailed out to me. I got to imagine that's probably cheaper to run than say, well, you got to keep these centers open around the province, rather than just to keep people shuffling in line with paperwork that they go to hand up to the window, pay $100 or $200, whatever the fee is. That's it. I mean, they got rid of the stickers, our driver's license stickers. So again, why do we need these centers in the 21st century?
I am a fan of having, especially in smaller rural areas, I am a fan of having, whether it's a kiosk,
Hmm.
whether it's a center, like I do think there needs to be a physical space that is staffed by a trained person.
Hmm.
Simply because you're going to have elderly people, immigrants, you're going to have people of all walks of life who aren't comfortable with online stuff or have questions or feel nervous.
Right.
And so like I see the inherent value because a lot of the things that government do, we run at a loss. It's just how government works, right?
Right.
Like the whole point of government is to provide service, and services don't necessarily have to be profitable. Most of them lose money. But just like education and healthcare, there are economic benefits to that. And Service Ontario, there's no economic benefit really. Having those places manned, like it's a loss, but there is an inherent value to it. Now, these kiosks, I believe that we used to have some in malls, and the issue was that
Yeah.
people put the card, I can't remember the name of it, the things that would read your cards and steal your data.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a data breach issue, I believe,
Okay.
which is why they were taken out of malls. And so then the question then becomes, well, why can't we put them back in malls and like
Upgrade the security features for them.
and have a staff member there at all times. Have it manned 24/7,
Yeah.
or not 24/7. Have it manned whenever the mall's open.
Right.
Because we're talking about foot traffic. We're talking about keeping people back in retail. What better place to go than a mall? Like,
Yeah.
and there's bound to be places in the malls that are empty that you can just put your kiosks outside of. Like you can put it in a central location. You can put it in one of the closed storefronts and talk to the malls and say, hey, we're gonna put a Service Ontario to go or on the run. You know what I mean? Like,
I hear what you're saying. My thoughts are just these you look at the trends. We're getting a bit off topic, but you look at the trends, you just see people are not going into malls. They don't go
yeah,
into any
yeah.
retail locations these days. And like that's for the last year, that's been what we've heard from the retail sector. Nobody comes in anymore. It's all online. I see your point, and we're not gonna get into the weeds on whether or not that's,
Yeah, no, I
but
get that completely.
but I see your point, and it's a valid one, which kind of, I guess, makes me want to get into, you were mentioning staffing, and I think that's what I think is the biggest draw to this, is that these will be Staples employees that'll be handling our very personal data, health card numbers, SIN numbers, driver's license information, fines that we might be paying for whatever it is that we do. All that stuff is going to be going through Staples. It's not a Service Ontario employee. It's a
Well,
Staples.
and what we don't yet know how the infrastructure exactly is going to work. So we're paying for the
Right.
retrofit. Does that retrofit involve having an on-site data server that is directly connected to government servers? Like, does it at any point in time have to travel through a Staples-owned server? At any point in time, is this going into the public net, or is the government paying for the retrofit because they would have to pay no matter where it goes
Right.
in order to keep it secure? If that's the answer, then Doug, say it. Say we have to keep things safe and secure. Then I'm on your side. But I don't. We don't know, and so because we don't know, because they're not saying anything, we have to be led to believe that there is nothing, and it's going through
Right.
Staples.
There's a big caveat to that I think people aren't really, the reason why I think there's a bigger deal than potentially than Greenbelt, I'll be honest, is because of the data. Uh, is that what you just said is a secure server that is entirely kind of closed within the government of Ontario main, network. Is that the case? Okay, we can deal with that. But if it's the idea is Staples is going to handle all that data traffic, and it goes through a Staples server before it's sent to the Ontario government to be processed, that's troublesome because that means a third party corporation will have access to, like, we don't really know what, but they'll have access to your SIN number. They'll have access to your driver's license, health card information, any fines that you might have, your business data, if that's the case. What's more troubling is the fact that that information could be sent to the United States. If that data crosses the border, which it most likely will, sent to a server in at Staples head office, is it now subject that the United States government could look at it for whatever reason or have access to it? And like,
And if people are freaking out about their TikTok data going to China, we should feel similar with any information, especially
absolutely
private information going to the States. I don't believe that would be the case because Staples Canada is technically a separate entity. So in theory, that data should not leave our country. In theory, and like I want to be optimistic in the idea that like there shouldn't be any issue. My concern is more so like what? So we had the Toronto Zoo and one other major organization,
Mhm.
the Toronto Public Library or something like that, had a data hack recently, or
Right.
oh, what's it called when they hold you hostage? I can't remember.
Malware attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happens if there's an attack like that on Staples? Staples is incentivized to lie to the province about what
Right.
data was stolen, right? Like there's no incentive for Staples to be honest about if data gets lost, if data gets stolen. So I'm not even worried about the company itself. I'm worried about bad actors that could attack Staples for that data.
Well, let's go on to my next point then. Um, I'm not even worried about necessarily bad actors attacking Staples. What I'm concerned about, well, I am, and that's for various reasons. But this is another issue that's popped up in my head. If you recall, here in the 905, we've had a string of car thefts. It's been widely reported there's a car theft ring
Yeah.
operating in the 905. They'll steal your car in your driveway. They drive it, punks, kids drive it up to a carpool lot, and then
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
books it over all the way to Montreal or to Halifax,
And
puts on a
it's on
ship.
a boat and it's gone.
It's gone to
Yeah.
Dubai. You don't see it again. there's that's ended, but there's a new operation going on where people will take your VIN number, your car, your the VIN number in your car, and they will swap it out for a phony VIN number. So they steal the car, the VIN number that is supposed to be on your car, right underneath your driver's window. It's swapped out for a phony one, so nobody knows the difference, and your car is resold on the black market, and it's driven around here in Canada somewhere. Those VIN numbers, it was discovered, were being ripped off by Service Ontario employees. This
Yes, I remember
this
that. Yes.
ring
Yeah.
would go to Service Ontario employees, and this is in the papers, folks. You can look it up. It is a documented case. They would just go and bribe the Service Ontario people, say, "Here's $1,000 for every VIN number you can give me," and they would just sit there, like, "Okay, here's 10 numbers, $10,000, 100 numbers, $100,000." Like this is and this is so, and that's when they were Service Ontario employees. If you're a minimum wage Staples employee, how easy is it going to be to have one of these rings walk up to you and say, "I'll pay you $1,000 a number," and you just thought, "I'll come by on Wednesday. You just hand me an envelope, and that's that."
Yeah. No, once again, I think on the optimistic side, like you would hope that the way that these kiosks are set up is that the staple employee who is working there part time or whatever doesn't have access to any of that. Like you would hope that that the kiosk is closed off. But once again, the government isn't doing anything to convince us of that, right?
Yeah.
So I want to believe that none of that can happen, and like part of me is not too worried that that's going to happen because Staples would want to keep this contract, and so they would probably put some stopgaps in place. But once again, the problem with this government is that they time and time again don't think things through. They will make a bad deal,
Hmm.
and then when it gets thrown into our faces, they just like sweep it under the rug and say, "Oh, yeah, it never happened." Like, do you remember the friggin' blue license plates?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well,
like
you not forget them. They're all over this road now, and you're like, that guy gets a free pass in the 407. Which
the
by the
and the gas stickers, right?
Yeah,
Like all of these small things. Like it is hard when people are like, "Oh, well, what else don't you like with Doug Ford?" I'm like, man, it is hard to explain because the list goes 6 years long, and there's so many things that I can't remember all of them. That is insane. It's Trump level stuff in terms of like you run out of things to remember to say that you don't like.
well, do you remember you talked about this? If Staples gets caught dropping the ball in this, if there's a massive data breach and our very personal data gets leaked or just misplaced, who knows what else. The relationship that this government has to private enterprise is shameful. Do you remember the 407 scandal when the company that runs the 407 was caught, someone was caught taking data from our customer data
Yeah,
from when driving the 407, and they're using it to hand over to uh to play favorites with the Conservative Party, I believe. That just kind of gets swept underneath the rug. No, nobody mea culpa, none of that. It was just, we'll
it
investigate.
happens.
It happens. And that's like right then, I would argue personally, I would say, well, that's my excuse to terminate the contract with the 407. You cannot steal people's personal data like that. That's we're taking it back, but it doesn't happen because that private business has to win out, and that's why I'm worried. That's why this really frustrates me, is that I don't know what Staples' motivation is. Just I need people to walk in my store and go up and down the aisles looking for reams of paper, new highlighters, and maybe a toner cartridge, and that's fine for Staples, but the priority now is they're no longer an office supply store. In my mind, they are a Service Ontario store now because that information is far more valuable than any MacBook or any office chair or office supply that they can sell. That's the incidental stuff, and that's what I think is missing from this equation. Is the idea is like Staples isn't an office supply store now; they are a data harvesting store because we have to go into them. We'll have to go into say, well, I need to renew my health card, need to process my kid's birth certificate, and that's stuff. And we just hand it over to a private corporation that they have not convinced us, the public, or me, the public, that they 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 have my best interests at heart.
Well, and there's also the fact that it's a pilot project, right? So they're planning on expanding it. Are they going to expand it only to more Staples locations? Are there going to be other companies? What happens when our data is shared across 5, 6, 7 different companies, most of
Yes.
which are probably going to be international American companies? Like it, it can snowball. It can get out of hand. So like if we're going to do something like this, I want to see safeguards in place. I want to see, and the truth is, I don't think that this is that big of a scandal in terms of public consciousness. I don't think the average person really cares. And the problem with that isn't like, oh, well, it won't hurt Doug in the polls. I don't care about that. My concern is more so that what if this is one of those things where the next government comes in and doesn't cancel it because, oh, well, it seems to be working. And then another government's going to own it when the hack does happen. Are we all going to forget that it was Doug Ford that did this? Are we all going to forget just like
Yeah.
how we forget Mike Harris did certain
It'll
things and we
be
blame
it'll be
whoever came after?
it'll be Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles. How dare you let this happen? And to an extent, I mean, it'll be on them because you should have canceled it day one.
Yeah, of course. But
I mean, well, the other problem I have is this government enters into like 100-year deals with
with
entities that,
obscure terms that we don't know and how like
yeah,
what's the least amount
that
and
and that in itself is so undemocratic. We the people should know every term that a government, or at least be able to look at every contract that our government enters us, the people, into.
because
Uh,
even my grandkids won't be old enough. Like my grandkids will be twice my current age by the time that those things
right,
uh get
expire.
are done with and so like it's going to be my great grandkids who might get to vote on the next thing like that's insane that is
Yeah,
insane that is they are so far removed from the current people and the current issues in Ontario like and and once again these contracts are being given to companies that even whether it's big or whether it's small there are connections. So for example, if we were to look at the small connection with Staples, the chairman of Staples Canada has donated the I believe close to the max amount or the max amount to Doug Ford's leadership
yep.
campaign, and he also donated the same amount to the Conservative Party the following year. That is a smaller thing, it's just a public citizen, doing a donation, sure. But what about the fact that the CFO of Thermi used to work for another financial institution, and that financial institution, after the CFO left, bought Doug Ford's Deco Label company?
Right.
Like, how is that not a thing that like all the red flags are going up, and how is that not something that the integrity commissioner should be investigating? Like this is not something that we just see once or twice. This is an ongoing habit with this government, where when you start connecting the dots, it makes you feel like a crazy person, like the scene from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. What like
Right.
but like you're not crazy when you make those connections with Doug Ford because he does it in broad daylight. And we're getting to the
Yeah.
point where people just don't care because that's how business is done. That's not how business is done. That's how the mob operates.
And like people should be pissed off at this. Like, and that's why like people just say, "Oh, Staples, that's just the company that I buy my toner cartridges from." What can they do? And it's like, and it's something that our governments just do not take this issue. And I'm going to chalk it up to every government, municipal, provincial, and federal. I don't think take the matter of our private data seriously enough. It is so powerful. It can be leveraged in so many ways. And it's not just Google ads on your phone, folks. We're talking people with real power. If you know their children's health history, or any fine in their fines, their driving habits, their just all this stuff that you say it's private. If you keep saying all these convoy Yahoo say, "Oh, stay out of my life. It's my private life. The government shouldn't be in my business." Yet you're not going to get infuriated when Staples or Walmart or Thermi has access to this data and they are not answerable to you. You cannot vote out a Staples CEO or the Walmart CEO, folks. They do not answer to you at all. And that's what really troubles me about this.
And I think the deeper conversation there, which maybe not for this time, but there is an erosion of public trust in government institutions. The fact that people will trust multi-billion-dollar faceless corporations over the
Right.
government is a huge concern. Like I get, while I don't agree with it, I get how people can get swept up in the Elon Musk of it all, where they see the strong man who's the richest man in the world and this and that, and sure, you know what, whatever. Anybody with half a brain knows that Elon's nuts. But
Hmm.
I get how that cult of personality occurs. The fact that a faceless company like Staples could be seen as more trustworthy than our government, regardless of who is in power, is an issue of concern, specifically because what has happened to our society where capitalism has become not just an economic system, but a way of life and a religion, right? Like people view not just the almighty dollar, but the system of capital as essentially the only thing that can be truthful and correct in our world,
Right.
regardless of whether or not you believe economically in a different system, socialism, whatever. We should still be looking at our current system and thinking to ourselves, maybe we don't give the super rich people even more ways to control us. Like if you're against Davos and the World Economic Forum,
Right.
you
Right.
should also be against the multi-million dollar players. Even if they're not multi-billionaires, they're still 100 millionaires. Maybe we should still be against that manipulation.
And
Like,
that's what, no, you're bang on. That's what gets me. I mean, those multi-millionaires, those 100 millionaires, they're looking to become billionaires. And what this agreement tells me is, you're talking about capital. We are the capital here. That information that Staples will have access to is incredibly wealthy in the right hands. And the fact that we don't know how Staples will have access to it, how they will be able to manipulate it, how they will be able to copy it if need be, um, is very troubling, and something that, this government's habit of rushing into things, and then kind of doing this whoopsie folk, folksy dozy, I heard you loud and clear. Okay, we'll just walk it back. Kind of, it's tiresome.
song and
It is,
dance, yeah.
it is frustrating. And this is like, you are not. This government just strikes me as, and I'll say it. I'm not a fan of the Trudeau government anymore. They have their own issues, but the Doug Ford government is literally far more dangerous. People don't understand it. It has nothing to do with, they're giving so much power to corporations that we do not know what their intentions are and know exactly what level of power they have to use this or leverage it against us, and that is incredibly troubling. And once it's gone, people, it's gone. We do not get it back.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that's almost impossible to undo, like the 407,
Yeah.
like the $500 million Thermi garage that they wanted to put underwater. Like
Yeah.
a lot of it ends up being nonsensical, and it almost feels like you're out of a freaking comic book. Like is Lex Luthor uh running Toronto right now? Like, I mean, not Toronto, I guess Olivia Chow would not be a Lex Luthor parallel, but it feels
No,
so
I see.
absurd that the world shouldn't, like, it just doesn't feel real. And I guess it's when it's so absurd and it doesn't feel real, people are more willing to just turn a blind eye and say, whatever, you know what, I have no power to change this, and everyone's bad anyway, so why
Yeah.
should I care?
I remember how upset people were with the green belt, and rightfully so. That was a completely justifiable and right response to that misuse of power. I know at the beginning of this episode you said you don't think it's that big. I think it ultimately will be, if not worse than, because Staples might not have ill intent. They might not have uh uh bad. They might just want more people in their stores to make a buck. That's fine. This is a way they figure they can get that going. I look at it and say, there are people. If that data is sitting there in an office kiosk in Staples, who knows who might get access to it? We know there are criminal elements that want it. They want access to it because they can defraud us. They can corrupt it. They can use it to their ends. We know foreign actors, China, Russia, actively try to hack government data sources. They try to attack Service Ontario data centers servers because they want that data. They want to know how much money you're making. They want to know illnesses that you might have. They want to know this. If we aren't secure in this, we can't make sure that this is ironclad, because Staples doesn't want to spend the money, or they can't find the profit margin on that. We need to end this contract. I know I sound conspiracy and I should be wearing the tinfoil hat, but I am this is gonna be a long time coming, folks. And it may not happen tomorrow, it may not be a year from now, but like 5 years, you're gonna hear of some Russia data farm in St. Petersburg has been hacking into Staples for the last 4 years, and now they know all your health records. They know how much you've been making. They know your debts. They know your driving habits. They know property that you own. And I mean, if you're coming with that because you might save a buck or two going into a Staples on your when you pay your driver's license fee. Okay, then we get the government we deserve. But this should be troubling people an awful lot more than I think it has been.
I know I got where you're coming from because it's one of those things where there's also the fear of the unknown in terms of like how bad could it get, right? We don't
Yeah.
know, and we have been dealing with that since 2016, since the first Donald Trump election. We have been dealing with people in Canada and the United States saying, "What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen if we elect Doug Ford? What's
Hmm.
the worst that can happen if we do this? What's the worst that can happen if we do that?" And time again, maybe it's not always the worst case scenario, but on a scale of 1 to 10 being the worst, we're still ending up with seven, eights, and nines across the board. And it's like with COVID being a 10, with the long-term care as being a 10, with the healthcare crisis
Hmm.
being a 10, and everything else being sprinkled across, still being in those high numbers. So what's the worst that can happen? We have seen the worst.
Well,
Just this is just a new avenue to get the worst.
we just I mean, you brought up Donald Trump. I use him as a perfect example. During that election that he was first elected, everybody said, "Oh, there's no way. There's no. The Americans wouldn't be that stupid to elect this jerk." And every poll, every data source said, "Oh no, Hillary's got it locked in the bag. She's going to be the next president of the United States." And look what happened. Like, do not discount that the worst case scenario could happen. And usually it happens because people just say, "Nah, nah, that's comic book stuff. That's science fiction."
Yeah, and I think what part of it too is like so let's just look at Ontario. Canadians are passive. We are. We
Yeah.
put up with a lot of
Yep.
stuff. We put up with price gouging and inflation, and we put up with the insane cost of housing because nobody wants to crash the bubble actively. We put up with this, that, and the other because well, Del Duca sucked and Horvath sucked, so I guess we got to go with Ford again. And so Canadians are pretty comfortable with things sucking. Like we have a fairly good, globally speaking, quality of life, and I think that has lulled us into a sense of security where it's like nothing that bad can ultimately happen. And so we now find ourselves in a position where when we used to be top three in everything in the world, well, then we were top five in everything in the world. Now we're like top 10 or top 15 in everything in the world. We're still one
Mhm.
of the best places in the world to live, but we are seeing a slippage of that. And I think part of that is because Canadians don't want to protest in the streets. Canadians don't want to, and I'm not saying overthrow the government because that is where some more aggressive people will go on
Mhm.
both sides of the political spectrum. I've seen it from tankies and I've seen it from freedom convoyers, but we were, I would say, a solid 24 hours away from a general strike in Ontario not too long ago. When
Yes.
when when the notwithstanding clause was about to be used to override the right to bargain, I wasn't in any of the rooms. I don't know what the union heads were saying, but I know what people were DMing me, and I know the vibes I was getting in my videos. People were begging me to call for a general strike, to use my platform to march on Toronto.
Mhm.
And these were not crazy people. These were moms with autistic kids and teachers and nurses and EAs and just regular people. And so we were so close to having something that I think could have radically shifted the political and cultural landscape of Ontario, and Doug Ford narrowly avoided it. Now, ultimately, I'm glad it was avoided because that would not have been a good thing in the moment.
Right.
But part of me wonders, do we need that? Do we need a thing to happen? I'm not saying an overhaul of government. I'm not saying something like what the Freedom Convoy and what the January 6th people want. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying a protest to the point where the government, like they do in Europe, says, you know what, we actually have to step down. Like this happens in Europe, where governments that have majority governments will see hundreds of thousands of people protesting in the streets,
Mhm.
and they say, okay, you know what, we'll dissolve government, we'll call an election. We don't have that here. Politicians are not accountable because we don't make them accountable. The politicians need to not fear us in terms of fearing for their lives. They need to fear constituents in so much that They work for us. They serve us.
Well, that's just that we don't we bought into this idea that government can't do it. It's like we're still buying into this Reagan Thatcher nomics point of view of, oh, the government is the worst thing ever. They're inept at everything. And it's like, no, like, yes, government shouldn't be making automobiles. Government shouldn't be making computers for office or furniture. That's a private sector deal. Got it.
But look at how many houses the government built after World War II.
Well, there's that too. The government can do things.
Yeah.
Also, we need the government to regulate things. Like if we need SIN numbers, we need driver's licenses, we need health card numbers, because that's how our system works. We God forbid you show up to your doctor and they say no health card number. Okay, well, I don't know what to do with you. Like we just would not function with that, and we need to. That's why I like to say we need to take this much more seriously. And the idea of like, well, we're going to save some money. I haven't seen that so far in any of the reporting that we're actually going to save tax
It's
dollars
costing us
on
money. It's costing us money. Yeah.
right. And I don't see it's going to give us any more convenience. That being said, I do agree we need to have more anger towards this. I think there is anger there, but I'm also thinking there's a lot of exasperation. People are just like, oh, Ford's going to Ford, and that's what we're dealing with. We've got 2 years of this, so maybe it's a matter of people just pacing themselves because they're saying we got to wait till 4 years to vote him out. My thing is I don't understand why the polls don't reflect it of
I think
him just cratering
yeah.
and
I
wanting
think there
change.
is I think there's a really salient reason as to why the polls and people's voting intentions aren't reflecting that right now. And that's because people are also fed up with Trudeau. So right now,
Yeah,
the federal election is first. And people are more upset with Trudeau than they are with Ford because it's easier and more tangible to be upset with the prime minister than with the premier, especially because a lot of people don't understand what the province and the federal government do. It's a lot easier for them
true.
to blame the province for healthcare, even though the federal government for healthcare, even though the province runs it.
Right.
Um, so I think right now, what'll happen is regardless of how the federal election goes, if Trudeau loses or wins or Pierre gets a minority or a majority, I think once that is done, 4 months later, all eyes are going to be on Ford. And I would not be surprised if Ford calls a snap election to occur just after the federal election in order to avoid the eyes on him. People will have all their eyes on whatever new government is in power, hating
Right.
Trudeau or being mad at Pierre or being worried about whatever. And he'll call his election early and he'll win. I think if he does that, he has a chance of winning on the majority because people won't have time to sit and reflect.
And that's just it. My hope is if you're listening to this episode, share it with friends or family, or just start stirring up those conversations. Most because I think our media has done a disservice to kind of gloss over, who's the leading or losing in the polls, as opposed to actually talking about the issues and talking about, the housing crisis, going actually into it, like what's actually causing housing prices. Well, I know we're going way off topic from Staples and Service Ontario here, but I use it as a microcosm of just people don't understand why prices are the way they are. We've been talking about it for years on this podcast. We have a good idea about it. We're still like think scratching the surface, but it's easier to paint it as like, oh, Pierre's up in the polls, Justin's way down. It's over housing. That's the article. That's the story. It's like, no, we need to do better. Um, I look at this Service Ontario story and I see a disaster in the makings, far worse than the Greenbelt possibly could have been. This would be people defrauded, people's identities being up for sale.
Individuals' lives being destroyed
Yeah,
versus a wider reaching issue.
yeah. I could just see it because right now I haven't heard anything about security measures, about promises from Staples or on the level of security encryption, the
Nothing.
processes to ensure that this data does not leave the government of Ontario. I don't see it, but I see Ford helping out his buddy, a donor buddy, as you said, to help out a few locations in Ontario because Staples can't figure out a way to get us into their doors. Um, And at the very least, this is at the very, very basic. This is a bailout for a failing retail operation in Ontario, as far as I can see. I don't see how this is going to serve us or get us a better service in the long run. This is a bailout for Staples because Staples like we can't figure out how to get people in the doors. Everybody wants to do the sales online and they want it delivered to the door. Rightfully so. It's convenient, but
Yeah, no, I feel you on that.
yeah. All right. On that cheery note, um, I'm gonna say that's it for this week's episode. Frank, always good to have a chat with you, even if it's the world's slowly coming undone at the seams. It's been fun.
Yeah, I mean, I once again, if I'm just gonna leave anybody with anything, it's like, you know what, it might feel like everything's coming undone, but uh, if you don't have a positive attitude in the little bit of the sense, like I get angry a lot. You watch my TikToks, I'm angry all the time, but I'm not an angry person in my moment to moment living. I get angry when I need to get angry, and I spur the emotion when I need to, but
Mhm.
every other time, like I believe, generally speaking, whether it's the province or the country or humanity, we are generally speaking on the upwards trajectory, and I think that that positive mindset is one of the key important parts to making sure that political change does happen. Because if we don't believe better is possible, we never will get better.
Well said. All right, folks. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Take care. Bye bye.